All right, here we go. Hilchot Dei'ot. Be'ezrat Hashem, we're starting a new section of halachot. These are the halachas of Dei'ot. Dei'ot is a tough word to translate. Here they say it means personality development. But the idea is that we're going to see, the Rambam discusses how a human being, how a Jew should live behaviorally, in his own behavior within himself, physically, nutrition, how to take care of your body, and also socially between other Jews. And of course, we're not talking about it just on the human level, we're talking about it on the Jewish level. So therefore, the Rambam gives us the list of mitzvahs that this law is going to encompass. Yesh bichlalan 11 mitzvot. We're going to discuss here 11 mitzvahs. 5 mitzvot aseh, v'shesh mitzvot lo taseh. 5 positive and 6 negative, v'zeu pratan, and these are their details. Aleph, lihidamot bidrachav. This is a general commandment to copy, to emulate Hashem's ways. Typically, we don't count general commandments in the 613. Like the verse says, Kedoshim tiyu, you should be holy. It doesn't have a specific way of doing it, so it doesn't get to be counted as one of the 613. So here, many people wondered why the Rambam counted this in his list of mitzvahs. In fact, they asked the Rambam's son, Rabbeinu Avraham ben Rambam, was asked, why is this considered to be one of the mitzvahs? And he said, because we're going to see, right, the Rambam gives a very specific way how to do it. There's a specific way to emulate Hashem's ways. Like the Talmud says, Mahu chanun, af atar chanun, he visits the sick, you visit the sick. So there's when it's limited to specific actions, it's not so much called a tzivui kolel. The Rebbe once said on a deeper level that it's because the mitzvah is that when you act in certain social ways, you should do so with the kavanah, with the direct intent that I'm doing it to copy Hashem. And when you do it with that direct intent and with that direct goal, it has a whole different meaning when you act a certain way. If you just act because that's how you're acting, so sometimes you act one way, sometimes you act another way. But if you're doing it with a direct intent to follow Hashem, then it transforms the way you behave. Bet, lihidabek biyodav, to cling, to stick to those who know him. This is a special mitzvah, to stick around Talmidei Chachamim who have developed their character and behave like them. Gimel, le'ahov et re'im, to love our fellows. Havta l'recha kamocha, famous mitzvah, loving another Jew. Dalid, le'ahov et hagerim, special mitzvah to love converts. Hey, shelo lisno achim, not to hate our brothers in our hearts. If you have a problem with someone, tell them about it. Vav lehochiach, you have to rebuke someone who's doing an avera. Zayin, shelo lahalbin panim, not to embarrass someone in public. Chet, shelo la'amnot umlalim, not to pain those who are unfortunate. Yatomim, va'almanot, widows and orphans, you cannot mistreat them. Tet, shelo lahaloch rachil, not to go around and gossip. Yud, shelo linkom, not to take revenge. And Yud Aleph, shelo lintor, not to bear a grudge. Ubir kol mitzvot elu biprakim elu. The explanation of all of these mitzvahs are going to take place in the following 7 chapters. So for the next week, we're going to be learning Hilchot Dei'ot Be'ezrat Hashem. Perek Rishon, chapter 1. The Rambam begins, Dei'ot harbe yesh lechol echad ve'echad mibnei adam. Every single person has many Dei'ot. And here again, you see how it's difficult to translate it. Here they write it means character traits. Basically, a person is not polar. He doesn't function on one level of instinct. We have the entire spectrum of emotions. The Rambam famously writes in Pirkei Avot, where it says that a person should be kal kanesher, ratz katzvi, gibor ka'ari. The Mishnah tells us to be like certain animals. Take this trait from an eagle, that one from a lion, that one from a leopard. The Rambam writes famously in his Pirush HaMishnayot that animals are limited to one pa'al o shnayim, 1 or 2 character traits. But the human being has the capability to be many things at once, many contradicting things at once. So the Rambam communicates the same thing over here by halacha, that every single person has many character traits. No such thing as defining a person in a box, that he has one way of functioning. There's many, many elements to what makes up the totality of his character. V'zu mishuna mizu u'rechoka mimena biyoter. Within his character, many of the traits can be one different from another and very far from it. Like you would think if a person was polar, so if he's an angry guy, that would also mean that he's very stingy with his money, and it would also mean that he's very tough to learn things, let's say. It's all a negative side. But that's not true. We find people that can be very angry but very generous, very stingy but very easygoing. That's how we work. We have many parts to our character traits, each one different and far from the other. And the Rambam over here illustrates with a number of extremes. Of course, not everybody lives on extremes, but the idea is to bring out the point. You appreciate it when there's contrast. Yesh Adam shehu bal chema. You have a person who is always angry. Ko'es tamid. He's constantly showing his anger. The Yesh Adam In contrast, you have a person, shada'ato miyushevet alav, his mind is very calm, ve'eino ko'es klal, and he never gets angry. Ve'im yichas, if he does get angry, for a certain reason, and the commentaries deal with why he would get angry. Some people say it's for a mitzvah reason. Let's say he sees somebody doing something wrong, so he wants to protect Hashem's honor. For himself, he'd never get angry. But for Hashem, he would get angry, let's say. Yichas kas ma'at bekam hashanim. He's only going to get angry once in a few years. That's the opposite extreme. Then, here's another example. V'yesh adam, you have people shu gval lev biyoter, who's extremely prideful, extremely haughty. V'yesh shu shval ruach biyoter. And some people you have very low of spirit, very humble. V'yesh, there are some people, shuhu bal ta'ava. He is a man of lots of lust and craving. Lo tisba nafsho mehaloch beta'ava. He never gets his soul satiated, satisfied from walking in the path of desire. You give him one desire, he has immediately another one. On the other hand, v'yesh shuhu bal lev tahor ma'od. Some people are a very pure heart. V'lo yit'aveh afilu ladvarim ma'atim shehaguf tzarich lehem. And he never desires anything, even those things which the body should need, and he should desire. The Rambam over here is talking specifically about ta'avot that are connected to the chushim, the five senses, things you can touch, taste, smell, hear, and see. Now he goes to another type of desire or lust. V'yesh bal nefesh rechava. You have somebody who has a very broad soul. This means greedy. Shelo tizba nafsho mikol mamon ha'olam. Giving him all the money in the world will never make him full. Ka'inyan shene'emar, as Shlomo HaMelech famously said, Ohev kesef lo yisba kesef. The lover of money will never get full from his money. You give him more, he wants even more. So here, we're not talking about a sensual desire, something he can touch or see or get more of. He just wants money in the bank account. V'yesh, on the other hand, you have mikatzer nafsho, somebody who cuts himself short. Shedayo afilu davar ma'at shelo yaspik lo. It's enough for him, even very little, which really isn't enough for him. V'lo yirdof lahasig kol tzarko. He never will engage in the effort to chase and get what he needs. Even though it sounds like this person is more like a person who is righteous and hard on himself, the Rambam actually describes him later as lazy. The opposite of greedy is lazy. So you have a guy who will go after money for whatever it takes, and the guy who will just sit on his couch, and even though he's got nothing in his bank account, but he's lazy, so he won't do anything about it. The righteous is going to come soon. Now we have people who treat themselves in certain ways. Some people starve themselves, pain themselves with hunger. The kovetz al yado, and he gathers everything into his hand. He's a hoarder. He will never consume a penny from what he owns, only with great pain. A miser, let's call it. Then you have other people that just willfully destroy kol mamono, all their money, biyado, with their own hand, lidato, mindfully. So, a miser or overly generous. And in the same way, sha'ar kol hadayot, you have all other character traits. Kigon, for example, miholel ve'onen, overly happy, overly depressed. V'kilai vashoa. You have the guy who spends, super generous, and the guy who is stingy. So here, the commentaries explain, he's talking about how he treats other people. Before it was how he treats himself. He's a miser, he won't spend anything on himself, or he spends tons on himself. Kilai vashoa is more in tzedakah. You have somebody who's an extreme miser. For himself, he'll never overtreat himself, but to others, he'll be super generous. Or the opposite. Others super stingy, but on himself, he'll spend the world. That's kilai vashoa and misagef u'me'abed. Then you have achzari v'rachaman, somebody who's cruel, somebody who's merciful, v'rach leva v'amitzlev, soft-hearted and hard-hearted, v'chayotze bahen, and similar. Those are the two extremes. Now, we don't function on extremes. Says the Rambam halacha bet, v'yesh ben kol de'ah v'de'ah, harechoka mimena b'ktzeh ha'acher. Between every character trait that's distant, on the edges, you have de'ot benoniot. You have intermediate character traits. Zu rechoka mizu, each one distant from the other. The commentaries explain this to mean that there's a line, there's a spectrum. So you have the two extremes, super angry, super calm, and then in between you have, let's say, 5 points of leaning to anger, leaning to calmness. The chol hadayot. Now here's the way it works. Famous question of nature or nurture. The Rambam weighs in on this. Every single character trait. Yesh mehen deot. Some are traits shehen la'adam mitchilat briyato lefiteva gufo, that a person will have from the beginning of his creation according to the nature of his body. However, v'yesh mehen deot, you have other types of character traits that a person won't have wired into him, but shetiv'o shel adam zeh michuvan, The nature of such a person is aligned, ve'atid, and he's destined, lekabel otam, to inculcate them, to make them part of his character, b'mehera yoter mish'ar adiyot, faster than other character traits. You watch this guy, he could become that. He is not born that way, but you leave him to his own devices, he'll become super generous, super stingy, etc. And then you have other things that are totally not part of your character. When you were born, nothing of this was evident in you. They were not belonging to the person from the beginning of his creation. He came to learn them from others. Human beings are social. We hang around people, we can learn from them and actually become part of who they are. He learned them from others, or he convinced himself. He turned to them on his own. Based on a thought that came up in his mind. Or he heard on TikTok or on YouTube, that this character trait is good for him. And that's what he should follow. And he behaved enough times in this way to the point that it became set into his heart. So we have the whole gamut, the whole panorama of Dei'ot. Starts with extremes on each side and ones in the middle. Now the Rambam says something very important, and I guess in all fairness, in this chapter and in the next chapter, there's a lot of blatant contradictions in what the Rambam writes. Many things that are just like, you read them and he's literally saying one thing and then the next halakha he's saying the opposite. The commentaries over the generations have struggled a lot to figure out, how to be miyashev, how to explain everything which the Rambam says. Nobody has a satisfactory answer. So as I presented, I'm just going to try to give you one perspective. And there's always going to be some questions left, but let's try to see if we can get some kind of a wholesome explanation of what the Rambam is saying. Says the Rambam halacha gimel, shtei k'tzavot harachakot zu mizu, the two ends that are distant from each other, shebechol de'ah v'de'ah, on every single character trait, einan derech tova, are not a proper path. So the way we're going to explain it is like this. If you have a number of Dei'ot, and we have all types of Dei'ot, when you figure out where you stand on each character trait, you've now created a derech, a path. In other words, a path is created from a number of points. So we figure out where you are on the anger spectrum. We figure out where you are on the stingy spectrum. We figure out where you are on the cruelty spectrum. And then now we have a derech. So the Rambam is saying over here, do not make your path on the extremes. Doesn't mean don't ever go to the extremes. We're going to actually see tomorrow that sometimes you have to go to the extreme. But don't make a path out of the extremes. So if you find yourself too much on one of the k'tzavot, you're not in good shape. So it's not a good derech to be on the katzeh. A person should not walk on this path, again, the path of extremes. Nor should he learn it for himself. In other words, if you find your nature going there, stay away. If you see other people acting like extremes, don't learn from them. If you find your nature turning to one of them, or prepared, in other words, easily destined to go there, or you already learned one of them. You turn around and before you know it, there you are on the extreme. And you've behaved in this way. Consciously, be aware, bring yourself back to good, and follow the path of the good people, which is the straight path. What is the straight path? Says the Rambam halacha dalet. Haderech hayeshara. The straight path, midah benonit, shebechol de'ah v'de'ah, mikol hadeot sheyesh lo da'adam. The straight path is made up of the middle points of every single de'ah. Taking all into account, stay on the middle path. It's the trait, it's the mindset, it's the type of personality that's equidistant from both ends equally. It doesn't go this way or that way, it's not close one to another, and that's the ideal way. You want to ask somebody what's the straight path? If you want to build your path, in the middle. In the middle.
The golden path.
The golden path. Lefichach tzivu chachamim harishonim. Therefore, our earliest sages have told us sheyehei adam sham de'otav tamid, that a person should always evaluate his de'ot. The pasuk in Tehillim says, "V'sam derech ar'enu b'yesha elokim," which literally means a person who puts himself on a path. Sam milashon sima, he will get to see the salvation of God. But the Talmud says, "Al tikre v'sam derech," don't read it putting with a sin, ela v'sham, a person who evaluates. A person who constantly evaluates his road, he is of the best character. So the Chachamim said, always evaluate your ways, your personality, umesha'erotam, measure them, umechavenotam baderech ha'imtzait, and try to align them on the middle path, kedei sheyehei shalem, so that you should be complete. Some manuscripts have the next word, bigufo, with your body. Others don't. Others say it's not about being bodily perfect, it's about being mindfully perfect and mentally perfect. But the Rebbe says you can even explain shalem bigufo as meaning shalem b'deot. According to the Rambam, a person who's most healthy in his body is a person who's healthy mentally. Ketzad, what would be an example of this, of going to the middle? Lo yehei, bal chema, noach lichos. You should not be a man of anger, easy to anger. V'lo kemet she'eino margish. Nor should you be like a dead person who doesn't feel. Ella benoni, rather you should be in the middle, average. Lo yichas, you should not get angry. Ella al davar gadol, shara'ui lichos alav, only on something major, something big, that it makes sense to get angry about. And even that with a purpose. You get angry so it doesn't happen again. Now here is one of those stirot that I was talking about. In Halacha Aleph, the Rambam described the two extremes of anger as a person who is ko'es tamid or da'ato meyushevet. But he does get angry once in a few years. Here the Rambam is saying the two extremes are easy to anger and a dead person who doesn't feel. And the middle is to get angry on davar gadol. So how do you explain that? So what one commentary suggests that over here, in Halacha Aleph, we're talking about how the trait is in action. Ko'es is Lashon Hoveh, it's present tense. Ko'es tamid, he's constantly getting angry, or he's only getting angry once in a few years. Here we're talking about the instinct, or what leads to the kas. Noach lichos, the words are over here, easy to anger. In other words, you're easily triggered. Met she'eino margish means you have no triggers. You're dead. When you're dead, nothing makes you feel. And then in the middle is big things, not specifically where you're getting angry, but the big thing is so big that it has to be prevented, that will lead you to anger. So he's talking about more of a, let's call it the layer that's under the anger. But again, it's many, many perspectives people have offered over the generations, and it's tzarich iyun. It needs more. Yeah, we're going to see tomorrow all the negativity about anger. But here he's talking about benoni. Bechen, on another example, lo yit'aveh, you should only desire ela lidvarim shehaguf tzarich lehem. So in Halacha Aleph we said you have a guy who never gets satiated from tava. Others is the guy who doesn't even want that which the body wants. Says the Rambam, don't be on the extremes, be in the middle. You should only want things that your body needs. V'ef shar lichyot bezulatan, and you can't live without them. Ki inyan shene'emar, as it says, tzadik ochel l'sova nafsho. A righteous person eats to fill his soul. Typically, we're used to the word tzaddik, meaning like, extra righteous man. But in the Rambam, tzaddik means somebody who's behaving bishurat hadin. Just the person who's doing the right thing. Tzaddik milashon right. So the right person eats according to the fill of his soul. On the next de'ah, the Rambam gives another example. V'chen, so too lo yiyeh amil bi'isko. You should not be laboring in your business, too much involved. Ela lehasig davar shetzarich lo lechayei sha'ah, only to reach that which you need for your temporary life. Ki inyan shene'emar tov me'at la tzaddik. A little bit is good for a tzaddik. Again, the word tzaddik is in the context of doing what's right. On the straight and narrow, a tzaddik wants just what's good. And so too on other things. V'lo yikpotz yado biyoter. Don't close your hand too much. Don't be too tight-fisted. V'lo yifazer mamono. Neither should you just give out your money with no cheshbon. Ela noten tzedakah kefim yisat yado. You give tzedakah according to your capacity. Umalveh kara'oi lemishat tzarich. And you also lend money properly to he who needs. V'lo yeheh meholel v'sochek. You should not be overly frivolous and too much laughing. V'lo atzev ve'onen. Neither should you be depressed or overly down. Ela sameach kol yamav benachat. You should be in a mindset of happiness all your days, but pleasantly. V'sever panim yafot, with an easygoing countenance. V'chein sha'ar deotav, and the same thing with all of your other character traits. You should make sure they're aligned in the middle. The derech zu hi derech hachachamim. This path is the path of the wise, because kol adam shedeotav deot benoniot. Anybody who all his deot are in the middle, memutzaot, and they're averaged, in other words, they're aligned in the center. Nikra chacham. He is called a wise man. Now the Rambam says, and again what seems to be an immediate contradiction to what he said in the last halacha, but let's just first see it inside. Halacha he. Umishu medakdek al atzmo biyoter. Somebody is extra careful with himself. V'yitrachek mide'ah benonit. Me'at letzad zeh o letzad zeh. And he decides to go a little off of the middle path, a little to this side or to that side. It means appropriately. In other words, sometimes it's going to this side, sometimes it's going to that side. If we're on the spectrum of humility, we don't mean you should go towards gava a little bit. We're talking about you go a little bit to humility. On the generous, stingy perspective, you're going a little more to generous. In other words, they go to each side according to what's necessary. Nikra chasid.
Makes the adjustments much more.
Exactly. This is called a chassid. So, how could you be called a chassid if you go off the straight and narrow path? So, some commentaries say, again, the Rambam is talking about creating your full path out of all your dei'ot. If you want to be guaranteed success, stay on the middle of every single one. But if you know how to measure your character and take care of yourself in exactly the way that makes it the best, where you can go a little bit lifnim mishurat hadin, a little bit above the letter of the law, and still stay conscious of never going to the other side of the middle, then you're called a chassid. That's, I guess, the best way or the easiest way to answer this contradiction. Ketzat, what is implied? How do we be a chassid? How do we go a little bit off of the middle path and go beyond the letter of the law? Mishi yitrachek migova halev ad hakatzeh ha'acharon. Somebody who distances himself from haughtiness to the other extreme. Now here we're going to have to explain either that it means ad doesn't mean all the way until, it means towards. Because if you go all the way to the other extreme, it wouldn't sound good. Right? The chassid only goes me'at letzad zeh letzad zeh. It goes a little bit this side or that side. Yet here, when it comes to gova alev, it tells you ad hakatzeh ha'acharon. So some commentaries say ad means towards. He goes towards the other edge. Some commentaries say, based on tomorrow's Rambam, we're going to see that actually when it comes to humility, to be a chassid, the proper way to do it is to go all the way to the other extreme. But every other one, it's ma'at letzad zeh letzad zeh. Most other ones, it's a little bit. Here it's a lot. Anyway, when it comes to humility, he goes away from haughtiness, v'yesh fal ruach b'yoter, and he becomes a very, very humble person. Nikra chassid, he is called a chassid, a pious one, v'zuhi midat chasidut, it's what we know as the character trait of chasidim. But if you distance yourself from haughtiness only to the middle, and you're a regular humble person, we can't call you a chassid, but we'll call you wise. And that's the character trait of chokhmah, of wisdom. In the same way, we can say about every other character trait. Chasidim harishonim, says the Rambam. In fact, we have concrete proof of this. The earliest chasidim, hayu matin de'ot shalahen miderech ha'emtza'it keneged shtei aktzavot. They would turn, they would lean their traits from the middle path to both ways, according to what they understood best for their souls. Yesh de'ah. There were some traits, shematinota keneged hakatzeh ha'acharon. Where you go, they would lean it towards the final extreme. Ve'yesh de'ah shematinota keneged hakatzeh harishon. Others, they would turn towards the first extreme. The commentators explain first and last as meaning doing more or doing less. So anger, too much anger would be katzeh ha'acharon. Less anger would be katzeh harishon. Humility, same thing. Others explain the opposite, actually. Katzeh harishon is when you do more, katzeh acharon is when you do less. The point is, you understand, the idea is to move your character traits off according to what you need. V'zeu lifnim mishurat hadin, that's beyond the letter of the law, but the mitzvah is umitzuvin anu lalechet b'drachim elu habenunim. The mitzvah that we have is to go on the middle path. V'hem hadrachim hatovim b'hayesharim, which are automatically the good and straight path. Shene'emar v'halachta b'drachav, as it says you should go in his ways. The Rebbe explains that middle automatically is good, because the whole idea of extremes comes from a person who's too excited, not using his brain too much.
Emotional.
It's too emotional. That doesn't allow him to differentiate between how he should behave, and he can't see another person's perspective. When you're in the middle, you're automatically good and just, because you're using your mind. Yeshuv adat, you're calm, you're collected, you're able to make proper decisions, and that's the mitzvah to go in the straight path. Says the Rambam, halacha vav kach limdu, or lamdu, b'perush mitzvah zu. This is how our sages learned or taught the explanation of this mitzvah. When it says v'halachta b'drachav, you should go in his ways, it means very specific things, as the Rambam's son explained. I mentioned at the beginning of the class. Mahu nikra chanun, just like Hashem is called chanun, af ata heye chanun. So too you should be gracious. And here you see also the Rebbe's explanation, that it's because Hashem is chanun, that's why you're being chanun. We're not being chanun because it's nice on a human level to be chanun. We're being generous or gracious because Hashem is gracious. We're doing it out of a direct intent to copy Hashem's ways. Mahu nikra rachum, just like Hashem is called merciful, compassionate, af ata heye rachum, so too should you be merciful and compassionate. Mahu nikra kadosh, same way he is called holy, af ata heye kadosh, so too you be holy. Separate yourself from the mundane ways. And so too, the prophets called Hashem with many different nicknames in descriptive terms, erech apayim, slow to anger, patient, v'rav chesed, lots of kindness, tzaddik v'yashar, righteous and straight, tamim, perfect, gibor v'chazak, mighty and strong, v'chayotzei bahen, and all similar titles, lehodia, because when they gave Hashem those titles, they let us know, shehen drachim tovim v'yisharim, that is the good and straight path, the chayav adam lahanhig atzmo bahen, and therefore a person is obligated to behave in those ways, ulihidamot elav kifi kochon, to copy Hashem according to his strength. Says the Rambam, what's the way to do it? What's the recipe to ingrain a certain character trait in yourself? The ketzad yargil adam atzmo. How does a person get himself used to? How does a person train himself? B'de'ot elu, in these character traits, ad she'ikav ubo, till they become set in you. If they're in my nature, I get it. But you told me before there are some that are not in my nature. How do I acquire traits? Ya'aseh v'yishneh v'yishalesh b'ma'asim she'oseh al pi hade'ot ha'emtzayot. Says the Rambam, you cannot train yourself to have an emotion. You cannot train yourself to have a certain way of your psyche. What you can do is deeds. Do deeds that a person with that dei'ah would do. And as the Chinuch famously said, acharei ha'ma'asim nimshachim ha'levavot. After your actions, the heart will get pulled. Your makeup will change based on what you do. You should do the ma'asim she'oseh al pi hade'ot ha'emtzayot. Do those actions that would match those middle character traits, average character traits, v'yachazor b'hem tamid, and repeat them constantly, ad sheyiyu ma'asehem kalim alav, till the actions become easy for you, v'lo yeyeh b'hem torach alav, and they won't be a bother for you, and then you will see v'yikav'u hade'ot benafsho, that those traits will then become ingrained into your soul. The Rambam writes in Pirkei Avot, hakol lefi rov ha'ma'aseh, the Mishnah says everything goes according to the multitude of actions, not godal ha'ma'aseh, not the size of the action, but the amount. Do something small many times, you will become that type of a person. So the Rebbe would encourage people to give tzedakah every day. Better, instead of giving $100 once, better give $1 every day for 100 days. Why? Because the Rov HaMaaseh will make you into a giver. Exactly. And since all these names, in other words, the positive traits are names that we assign to Hashem, they are the middle path, which we are obligated to go in, to walk in. This path therefore becomes called the way of Hashem. It's the one that Avraham Avinu taught to his children. As it says, Ki yadativ, Hashem says, I know Avraham, or I love Avraham. Leman, because Asher Yetzaveh v'gomer, because he commands his children to go in the derech Hashem. Somebody who walks in this path, brings himself good and blessing. As it says, Leman havi Hashem al Avraham, so that Hashem brought on Avraham et asher diber alav, that which he spoke about him. He brought all the positive blessings because he walked in the derech Hashem, which is the derech habenonit, the way of the straight and narrow on the middle of each and every dei'ah.